Alright, you guys, so we have finally reached the climax of this series. This will be the last VPremium Keter Sanctuary deck profile that I have for you. And today it's going to be my updated variation of my Shadow Paladin Mesmerizing Witch Fianna deck. Now, it brings me great heartbreak that this will be the last VPremium deck I'll be putting on the channel related to this deck for a while, but with Overdress only one day away at the time of making this video, I'm excited to see what the future holds. So without further ado, let's begin. I play 4 copies of Mesmerizing Witch Fianna. Fianna, still an amazing late game card. As time has gone by and I've been practicing more and more with this card, just understanding her playstyle and choosing to focus the deck on her first ability very heavily, I have learned over time that this deck just works very well as a later game deck. You want to focus your early game on setting up so that you can do your combos, control your resources, and then finally go for your kill turn on the final turn. That's the best way to play this deck, as getting the additional 5,000 power from the grade zeros that your opponent's going to have to put in the drop zone later in the game from just defending or from other skills and etc. just means that you're going to get the full benefits of this card later in the game than you will do in the early game, as you won't be able to do so unless you want to get the power to do everything you need to do for her and the grade 2. The awkwardness of this card does come into effect, but it's only awkward if you're trying to gain the advantage of both skills. And then you just focus on using the grade zeros your opponent already has to get your resource skills off first before caring about the other abilities. Then it's not as irritating to work around. It just means that you have to choose what you want first or second. Do you care more about getting the additional Vanguard attack with the drive checks, or are you trying to focus on a strategy where you just get more power? Me, personally, I prefer to go more for the drive checks. I don't really care too much about the power. We are a force deck, and with some of the changes I made to this deck, power isn't as much of an issue as it used to be, especially with Fianna. But that is just something to consider when you play with her, is the fact that because of how the grade 2 Femme works with her, you do have to consider on which one you want to go first or secondly with, and how you want to play the deck. As do you want to focus more on the power gain, the board manipulation, or do you want to focus more on gain the additional drive checks and resources to set up for this final turn play that you have? For my next grade 3, I play 2 copies of Danger Lunge Dragon. So Danger Lunge Dragon is inevitably the win con of the deck. His ability to pretty much be a Dragonic Waterfall on the rear guard is extremely powerful, and it makes everything that we do revolve around him. Fianna being able to get the additional drive checks means that we have a potential to stack 4 triggers onto this card, and his ability to stop your opponent using Sentinels just makes this card a lot more lethal, as this deck doesn't really have many beatdown like plays or anything, so it's not going to be all like a very fast game with this deck. This deck, for a Shadow Paladin deck, knows how to play it slow and take your time and get everything that you need, because you have an engine in the deck that allows us to do superior writing, meaning we already get a force marker before our opponent, or at least 2 force markers on the turn of our opponent. And with that engine in the deck, it just makes this a lot more faster and a lot more consistent, as we're focusing our cards and getting the pieces for that, so that we can perform that engine that I'm going to showcase later in the game to make our Danger Lunge Dragon the perfect finisher for this deck. And finally, for my last grade 3s, I play 1 copy of Phantom Blaster Dragon. Now, I am playing the entire engine for the Phantom Blaster Dragon Superior Ride Engine, hence the reason I only play 1. I actually do sit on this card sometimes, depending on where the game is at, only because his first ability does put on a lot of pressure, and giving up the rear guards to gain the power and the critical and board wipe our opponent, depending on what we're playing against, is actually extremely powerful. In some cases, I do consider playing maybe like 1 more, just because it is sometimes just a better option than riding either into the Danger Lunge after the Fianna or just riding into Fianna. But right now, I enjoy what my deck is playing at. but this deck still has a lot more versatility into it depending on what strategy you go for. But I do think that playing him and his Riot Chain is extremely helpful and getting the fastest Shadow Paladin deck you can get. And now it's time to showcase my grade 2s. I play one copy of Blaster Dark. I only play one copy of Blaster Dark because he is a part of the Riot Chain engine. This card really doesn't do anything else later in my games, except if I do see it, I can retire something, but other than that, he doesn't serve a purpose. For my next grade 2, I play one copy of Dumphood Dragon. Dumphood Dragon is just another key piece of the Riot Chain engine. You want to use this card to search out your deck for the Blaster Dark, as he is searchable with Skull Witch Nemain to be superior called. For my next grade 2, I play 4 copies of Witch of Reality Femme. Seeing as how we are playing a Legion-based deck, you need to be playing 4 copies of Femme. Femme, over time, I used to really just hate the awkwardness of what she did with Fianna, but now I somewhat kind of like it because there are times you are playing against a deck where you rather would just, get rid of their cards versus then getting rid of the drive checks, because some decks are piece reliant and do require their key pieces to be on board for them to get the full advantage of that. And when you're constantly messing with your opponent's board in the sense of getting more grade 0s onto them, they have to take cards out of their hand or resources to call over them to make their attacks relevant, because 2 grade 0s don't make a column strong enough to actually hurt you. I do think that her Vanguard ability is extremely helpful as well when you play her. She's always going to want to be your main ride option, except the other card that we now have for the deck. And getting the additional drive check for this card is extremely helpful, as this is one of the main resource building ways we can do on our grade 2 turn. But between this card and the next card that I'm about to show you, we now actually have 2 amazing Vanguards for our early game. Alright, you guys, and for the newest edition of the deck, I am now playing 4 copies of Dragwizard Liafall. So, I do have to come clean about something. In my last deck profile, I was playing the Dark Sword Maiden Maka, and the reason why I was playing her was because power was a really big issue with this deck, since a lot of my attacks for a force deck weren't even really making like good magical numbers. But I only chose not to play Liafall earlier only because at the time I couldn't afford Liafall. It was a $20 card, and I was not about to drop $20 on playset of Liafalls because I wasn't even a big Shadow Paladin player, and I wasn't playing in tournaments at the time. So it was like I'd rather spend $80 on something else. But I looked out, I caught him when he went back to being like $15, which saved me about like $20, which was good. So now that I have Liafall, I feel like this deck has just become a lot more consistent. Liafall being able to get you all the resources from your deck that you need is extremely helpful. He actually being introduced into the deck allows us to play other key grade 1 pieces that are important to our strategy, and he also helps us fix our Riot Chain in case we miss anything with our Skull Witch Nemain. And him being able to do that as a grade 2, since the abilities on Vanguard or Rearguard, is extremely helpful. I really do feel like I missed out not playing Liafall before, but having him to be a key piece and calling out any of the grade 1s that we need for the deck is amazing. And now I'm going to showcase my grade 1s. So this is Shadow Paladin, so there are a few grade 1s here and a few new ones too. So for my first grade 1, I'm playing 1 copy of Black Sage Charon. So Black Sage Charon is a new addition to the deck. We actually can play her now due to Liafall, and if we don't have damage, we can use this card to be called from Liafall to get the whole countercharging thing, to get our damage back and get more power, and to have a stronger column. Next grade 1 is 1 copy of Freezing Witch Bendi. This is the card that allows the entire Riot Chain to be possible. You only need to play 1 of her just because you only need 4 cards for the Riot Chain, and I just don't feel like playing more of her would be any good, as I'm not playing multiple Phantom Blaster Dragons, and at that point it doesn't even feel good to me to do so. But she's just the key piece in the Riot Chain and makes everything happen. And for my next grade 1, the newest addition of the deck is 2 copies of Abyssal Owl. So I decided to go to Abyssal Owl over Black Winged Swordbreaker only because counterblasting did end up being an issue in this deck, and with introduction of Liafall versus Maka and with Charon, I did have to play a deck where I needed to save my counterblast for my more important skills, as if I don't, then I'm just going to be using counterblast all the time, and I have to, fight or have a hard time deciding on which abilities I want to use the counterblast for, because I obviously need to activate Fianna every single turn in order for the deck to have a chance, but if there's any other rearguard abilities, I have to be picky on if I want to do Maka, if I want to do Swordbreaker, or if I use Maka to call out Swordbreaker, wouldn't be good. So Abyssal Owl having his really awesome ability to pretty much say choose a Soul Blast or a Counter Blast depending on what grade you and your opponent have is extremely helpful, as it just potentially saves me one of my main resources for the game. And the extra card draw is good too. To the next grade 2, I play 2 copies of Accomplishing Knight Dylailt. In this deck, we do use a lot of soul, so being able to superior call Accomplishing Knight Dylailt to get that soul back for all of our skills is extremely necessary, as this deck does use up every single resource pretty consistently, from counterblasting to soul blasting and even the drop zone. So we need to be able to make sure that we can replenish those resources in a consistent way. And Dylailt being searchable through Skull Witch Nemain makes him extremely important to play. For my next grade 1, I play 2 copies of Cherishing Knight Branwen. So Cherishing Knight Branwen and I have a love-hate relationship. I really do love this card in Cleric Sword Dragon, just because it fits the entire theme of the deck. But in this deck, because I play the Riot Chain engine, sometimes it's not good, as Freezing Witch Bendi unfortunately doesn't let you superior right from the hand, it's only from the deck. So whenever you see Phantom Blaster Dragon as your only grade 3, it's not good. But 9 out of 10 games, she's important to have, because you really do need to ride Fianna, and when you're ready for your Danger Lunch Dragon, you need to be able to search that out. And getting our key grade 3s, as every grade 3 we play is very important, and we only want to see 2 of them in our hand ever, is extremely important to have, as once we get our combo pieces ready, at that point we're just using the cards that we already have on board to just keep the tempo of the deck going and getting more pieces and resources, so when you finally do go into that Danger Lunch Dragon turn, we have nothing to worry about, as our Danger Lunch Dragon will be strong enough to finish our opponent off for us. And she's a really strong booster, which makes our Danger Lunch columns even better as well. For my next grade 1, I play 4 copies of Cold-Blooded Witch Luba. So to be completely honest, I do not like this card at all. She doesn't really do anything at all in your early game. She's too expensive to play, even if you do combine her with Femme. But in the later game, she actually does become very important, because Fianna doesn't allow you to get your grade 2s from the drop zone like the other Legion cards do. With Fianna, you actually have to go ahead and search out through hand or through deck, which I think was always a terrible design of the card. You should just been the deck or the drop zone like Percival or one of the other Legion cards, but that's just me. So Cold-Blooded Witch Luba, allowing us the ability to recycle some of our key normal units into the deck, whether it be Femme or our Danger Lunge, is extremely important, as we now have better ways and more consistent ways of searching these cards out. So having her to recycle is good. It's just that I wish she was better in the early game than she was in the later game, but that's what Luba does. And then, of course, I had to save the best for last. The most important grade 1 in the deck is 4 copies of Skull Witch Nemain. Skull Witch Nemain is by far the most important grade 1 of this deck. She searches everything out. She enables all your combos. She lets us set up for our resources early. And she just allows us to thin out our deck for more triggers. This card really is a Shadow Paladin staple. If you're going to be playing the Shadow Paladin clan, you need to be playing 4 copies of this card. I don't care if you're playing Cleric, Fianna, PBD, or no, you can't play this card with Luard anymore. I just remember that. But the point is that this card is essential to the survival of this deck. It's the only reason why this deck might have any competitive viability at all. And getting the right chain off with this deck on top of the resource manipulation, the board calling, is why this card is so important for this deck out of every other deck, as this is the reason why this deck is just able to do what it does. Moving on to my triggers, I play 4 copies of Darkside Trumpeter. I play 4 copies of Death Feather Eagle. I play 4 copies of Dark Shield Maclear. I play 4 copies of Abyss Healer. And finally, for my starter, I play 1 copy of Dragprince Rute. So, as you guys notice in this deck, my trigger lineup has not changed at all from last time. I did try adding more draw triggers into the deck, but the idea behind that was that they were going to be fodder for retiring for Fianna. However, because Luba, I've actually been playing that card a lot more attention lately, I realized that being able to recycle my key pieces is extremely important and easy for this deck to do. Not only that, I can recover a lot of advantage back with just getting 1 skull with Nemain, so as long as I always can find a Nemain or have a Nemain in deck, I'm not ever really worried about it. Plus, there are games where on that first turn you're using the Phantom Blaster Dragon, and if you do get the extra critical and you're in a good position already because you created your opponent before, you can actually kill your opponent on just your first Phantom Blaster Dragon Superior Ride. Because you're not going to be able to get the right chain off unless you go first, or if you go second, you'll just be matching your opponent on the grade 3. If you go first, you'll be 1 turn above for the Phantom Blaster Dragon if your opponent gives you the damage to do that. So 8 crit, 4 draw, 4 heal was just the best route to go for this deck, because this deck already gets good advantage and good resources. You just need the power and critical to make your attacks scary, as power is something that we do struggle with, not as much, but still do with this deck. Alright, you guys, so we are now at the point in the video where I like to discuss with you what is the best trigger. Alright, you guys, so we are now at the point in the video where I like to tell you what I believe is the best market to play for this deck. So, because our deck does focus on setting up for a Danger Lunge kill turn while messing with our opponent's board, requiring resources, and gaining other cards and other effects for later in the game, I do believe that Force 1 is the best way to go. Unfortunately, this deck does struggle with power a little bit, as with Fianna, you have to decide, do I want to focus her ability on getting more power for her, or do I want to focus on getting more drive checks? And for me personally, I always would prefer to get more drive checks, as it's more card advantage that's free from just the rules of the game itself. And the 10,000 power going on to your Danger Lunge Dragon or to your Femmes that are going to be turning to Vanguard is extremely helpful, as it just makes that second Vanguard attack or that first Danger Lunge attack extremely threatening, as unlike other decks, this one is really focused on the slower playing of the game. Especially for a Shadow Paladin deck, it really does have an unorthodox play style, which is why Force 1 being able to make sure that all of your units' attacks are relevant and can hit while acquiring resources is extremely helpful and keen to the deck being survivable and competitively viable at all. This is a big brain deck. Alright, you guys, so that is it for today's deck profile. Thank you so much for watching my last VPremium Keter Sanctuary deck profile for this channel. If you guys enjoyed today's video, please make sure to give it a thumbs up. Also, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to my channel so you guys get notified with my... Alright, you guys, so this is the last video for my Keter Sanctuary VPremium deck profiles for right now. If you guys enjoyed today's video, please give this video a thumbs up. It does help the channel. Also, do not forget to like, comment, and subscribe to my channel. And hit that notification bell so you guys are always notified when I have new deck profiles or discussions coming out. At the time that I'm making this video, we're only one day away from the Overdressed trial decks, and once they get in the mail, I can't wait to do my unboxing and get my hands on all of these new cards that I'm so excited to test out and play with. So, thank you so much for watching. Peace.